to enter questions, so please do that as they come to you, and we'll be collating them on this end, and I'll be teeing them up to our experts at appropriate points during the conversation today. So please don't hesitate on firing at will. So to dive right in, thanks again for joining. Today we're going to be talking about the latest and greatest from WRI's various teams and their work across the food and bev sector and supply chains, and opportunities for you to engage with us. So as many of you may know, WRI is a global research organization that, and our kind of challenge here is making big ideas happen. Although I will say that we're less and less of a research organization, more of a research and do tank. And as you'll see throughout the conversation today, we spent a lot of time developing not only research, but best-in-class tools that allow you to drive strategies and success and sustainability vision across your supply chain. So when I think about WRI and having worked with and within many of our partner NGOs across this landscape over the years, what kind of is the differentiating factor of WRI amongst our friends and kind of the alphabet soup of NGOs? So when I think about the partners that we work with very closely every day, whether it's WWF, TNC, EDF, WBCSD, Ceres, and so on and so forth, what kind of differentiates WRI and how do I think it's helpful for you to think of us? First and foremost, I would say that we're not necessarily a quote-unquote environmental organization. We don't come at these issues, whether they're food loss and waste, water, deforestation, through purely an environmental lens. We're not kind of looking at this for protecting critters for critters' sake or land for land's sake, and those are very respectable virtues or values. But we really look at these issues through a human development lens, coming from the standpoint of you don't get to have 10 billion people on the planet living healthy, happy, and their fullest lives unless we have more sustainable systems than we currently have. And so we spend a lot of time focusing on that systemic change and what that looks like. I think the other big differentiating factor is we're not an advocacy organization. We don't run campaigns like many of our friends at other organizations do. We are a data-focused organization. And to that end, our motto here is count it, change it, scale it. And so what does that mean? Well, as you'll hear from my friends in the call ahead, we spend a lot of time creating protocols, tools, research that allows for the best information to be counted from the kind of old management mantra that many of us learned in school of that which gets measured gets managed. From there, we look at kind of what are the fulcrums and levers to affect change in various supply chains or systems, and then the scaling it. When we say here, we can't scale it alone. That's why we work with you, some of the biggest companies and supply chains across the planet. So we do the counting, we identify what needs to change and how it needs to change, and then we work with you to do so. I would say also, when you think about the work that we do, I think of it in kind of maybe 3 or 4 main buckets. So one are standards and protocols. So many of you are familiar with the greenhouse gas protocol that WRI helped form many years ago, and we kind of serve as the secretariat for that, updating it and keeping it alive and responsive as companies change. We've leveraged that experience, and Rich will talk about the food loss and waste protocol. We also develop best-in-class open access online tools. So Luis will talk about our Global Forest Watch platform, and Sarah about our Aqueduct platform. Many kind of best-in-class tools out there leveraging global data sets for allowing you to make decisions across your supply chain, wherever it may hit. We also do a lot of convening, whether it's in the renewable energy space, the climate space, new restoration economy. So we spend a lot of time bringing together the best stakeholders across the planet to allow them to work together and kind of punch above their weight. And then last but not least, we spend a fair amount of time providing intel and advice. So from the various perches that our colleagues sit at across WRI's global network, we have an interesting perspective, and we often are asked to provide our insights on what does the latest 5-year plan in China mean for my industry, or what does the UNFCCC, what's going to be happening at the next intersessional, and how does that affect my sector. So please see us as a resource in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead for answering these sorts of questions. So when I think about the supply chains in which many of our guests on the call today operate, I think it's helpful to know that while you're chatting with some of our team here in North America, we have, I call them 700 ologists of various shapes and sizes across the WRI's global constellation of offices. So whether it's here in North America or in Europe, places like Brazil, we have numerous offices across Asia, Southeast Asia, and now in Africa. We are where the action is. And I think a unique note in terms of kind of insider baseball around WRI, for the first time in our organization's history, we now have more experts living outside North America than inside, really reflecting where the challenges and the action is in the sustainability agenda. So pretty much if you have a market that you're interested in or a problem that you're trying to solve, we probably have somebody pretty close by. So why food and why on the call today? Well, food is an interesting nexus issue, and we're increasingly thinking about how our 6 or 7 main program areas today can kind of add up and start solving not just siloed problems like water in itself, but how does that affect water vis-a-vis different other issues like in food. So in the broadest of brushstrokes here, essentially as a global society, we need to be producing way more food than we're doing today in conditions that will be harder to grow, often due to exacerbations from climate change. So some areas will have less rainfall, some will have more variable rainfall conditions, increased temperatures in many areas, and also increased demand for both land and water in most geographies. So within this kind of vexing context, we need to be providing more people with better nutrition in a more sustainable way. And that's where it comes, and this is where the scaling strategy, we can't do that here alone. We need your help to do so. While doing so, you will also be buttressing your supply chains for the decades ahead. This is one of my favorite slides when I think about WRI, because these are the kind of powerful brands that fall under the WRI umbrella. So today we'll be talking about kind of that first row here, Food Loss and Waste Protocol, the Better Buying Lab, Global Forest Watch Pro, Aqueduct, and our science-based targets work. So I first want to tee up our food program here, and I want to introduce my colleague Rich. Rich is a researcher in the food program. He's been with WRI for 10 years and with the food program since it was first established 6 years ago. He works on the Better Buying Lab, one of the 2 initiatives he'll discuss, and he's also an author of the World Resources Report, Creating a Sustainable Future. So Rich, thanks for joining us today, and over to you.
Great. Well, thanks, JP, and thank you all on the webinar for joining us today. The overall goal of the food program is to help the world sustainably feed 10 billion people by 2050. And today I'll go over briefly 2 initiatives that we have supporting that. The first, the Food Loss and Waste Protocol, which helps companies measure, report, and reduce food loss and waste. And the second being the Better Buying Lab, which helps companies enable a shift toward more sustainable diets, being diets that have a greater share of plant-based foods. So before diving into the 2 initiatives, JP mentioned the challenge of increasing the world food supply by 70% by 2050. So this is a big challenge. And our program research looks across the broader menu of options for sustainably closing this large food gap, both on the supply side and the demand side. So on the supply side, in the blue on the graph there, the world can produce more food by transitioning to more climate-smart agricultural practices. And then the reds there are the world can also reduce projected growth in food demand by moving towards more sustainable consumption patterns, including reducing food loss and waste and shifting diets. So we have a major report coming out later this fall called Creating a Sustainable Food Future that goes in depth on how to realize each of these options, both on the supply side and the demand side. But today, I'm going to focus on the 2 demand side options there, food loss and waste and shifting diets. So food loss and waste, we know that globally this is a big problem. 1/3 of all food produced in the world is lost or wasted between the farm and the fork. Here in the US, that number is closer to 40%. That creates a large environmental problem as well. So if food loss and waste were its own country, it would be the world's 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter after China and the US. But for such a big problem, there's surprisingly little actionable data out there. So if you're a company and you need to know where the food is being lost and wasted across food supply chains to be able to design effective strategies to reduce food loss and waste. So that's what our Food Loss and Waste Protocol is designed to do. It's designed to help fill that gap and enable that measurement to occur. So we've worked with a number of organizations, UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the Consumer Goods Forum, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, to develop the world's first global accounting and reporting standard to measure food loss and waste across supply chains in a consistent and credible way. And so standard really provides users with a common language and definitions around food loss and waste, and also gives you practical guidance on measurement and reporting. So just to common language and definitions, show you sort of what's under the hood here. I mean, different companies are going to have different needs when quantifying food loss and waste, and the standard helps you identify loss and waste both of food and also associated inedible parts like bones, rinds, and pits. It's valid for all stages of the food supply chain, from production through processing, distribution, all the way through the consumption stage, and helps you identify also where the food loss and waste is going once it exits the food supply chain. So is it diverted to animal feed? Is it plowed back into the soil? Is it ending up in the landfill? And again, all of this with the end goal to design better food loss and waste reduction strategies. So you can visit the website to download the standard. We also have an increasing number of case studies showing how other food and beverage companies are using the standard to, why they're using the standard, how they're using it, and how it's helped their business. And we also do periodic training. So actually, we have a training tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern on how to summarize your food loss and waste inventory. So feel free to get in touch with us after the webinar, and you can also sign up for updates on this at our website. And final note on food loss and waste, we've also worked over the last year to analyze the costs and benefits of reducing food loss and waste. So we looked across more than 1,200 business sites in 17 countries, and we found that on average, for every dollar invested in reducing food loss and waste, there was an average of a $14 return. So this suggests that reducing food loss and waste is a big sustainability opportunity, but also potentially a business opportunity as well. So shifting gears a little to shifting diets. A couple years ago, we published a paper called Shifting Diets for a Sustainable Food Future, and it found that in countries like the US, European countries, other high-income countries where we consume a lot of meat, reducing the amount of meat in diets, and especially reducing the amount of beef and lamb, given their outsized environmental impact, and shifting towards plant-based foods can greatly help reduce agriculture's pressure on the environment. So here, this graph just shows how, for example, in the US, if the average person were to go vegetarian, it would reduce the land and greenhouse gas footprint of their diet by about half. But asking everyone in the world to go vegetarian and vegan, it would be a lot of large lifestyle changes. We also found in those middle bars there that just shifting, for example, away from beef to other foods or from meat towards plant-based foods can significantly reduce environmental impacts by something like 15 to 45%. So these smaller diet shifts targeted at high-impact foods and scaled up across millions of consumers can yield pretty big potential benefits for the environment. But we also know that shifting consumer behavior is notoriously difficult to do. So in our Shifting Diets research, we've also analyzed a number of large-scale consumption shifts towards more healthy and sustainable products. And we learned a few lessons along the way. So one, among these sort of successful shifts, there's minimal disruption to consumers. We make it easy for consumers to choose the more sustainable product. In the successful case studies, there's savvy marketing that plays up not just the environmental benefits of the more sustainable product, but attributes that consumers really care about, like taste or price or convenience or quality. In all the cases, the more sustainable products need to be widely available and accessible to consumers, and there's almost always a financial benefit to the companies involved. And so our new Better Buying Lab, which has been around for a year and a half, seeks to apply those lessons to the challenge of shifting towards more plant-based foods. And we brought together about 10 leading food companies, along with experts in marketing and behavioral economics, to research, test, and ultimately scale up strategies that will enable consumers to choose more plant-based foods. And so just briefly, our three current areas of research and innovation, first is around developing more compelling language to describe plant-based foods. If you look on menus, if plant-based foods are described as vegan, vegetarian, meatless, that can actually suppress demand for them among mainstream meat-eating consumers. And there's emerging evidence that using more positive and indulgent language that's usually reserved for the meat-based dishes can increase demand for plant-based dishes and help drive their sales. So we're helping companies field test a number of improved descriptions for plant-based and plant-forward meals. Our second is around what we're calling power dishes. And so these are a handful of dishes that have the potential to have broad mainstream appeal. And we're working to help develop the dishes and then scale their adoption. So one example of this is the blended burger. This is a beef burger, but has 20 to 40% mushroom blended into it, and this can actually improve the burger's taste while greatly cutting back on the environmental impact. And finally, and this is going to connect to my colleague Stephen's talk, but we're working with food companies to establish science-based targets for shifting diets. So thinking through the question of how much of a shift towards plants is enough in light of global goals like limiting climate change below 2 degrees. And we're going to be helping companies benchmark the environmental performance of the foods that they're selling and then monitor progress. So here are our Better Buying Lab members. I believe several members are on the call today, so thanks very much for your partnership. Collectively, these members serve more than 60 billion meals per year. So to JP's point on scale, there's already an opportunity within the group to take the solutions we're developing to scale. But our real goal is to be sharing insights and research developed in the lab with the broader food and beverage industry. So the first wave of research on language is going to be coming out this summer, so stay tuned. And you can always visit wri.org/food to learn more or to sign up for updates on the Better Buying Lab, Food Loss and Waste Protocol, or sustainable agriculture more generally. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And I should have mentioned at the top of the call, for those hungry for more, sorry for the bad pun, we will be sending around slides and all relevant links and follow-up items for you after the call. So no need to be doing screenshots as we go. We'll be sending that all over to you. So from food, let's go over to water with my colleague Sarah. Sarah's been with WRI for 9 years and manages WRI's work on water quality and the intersection of water and food. So Sarah, over to you.
Okay, thank you, JP. Thanks everyone for joining. So I'll share a little bit about what WRI's water program does with companies through our Aqueduct platform and alliance. And we work closely with food and beverage companies in particular, given, as JP described, how closely tied agricultural and water issues are. So for example, we help food and beverage companies assess their water risks to their supply chains and impacts of their supply chains and operations. And we also work with companies on taking meaningful, innovative action to address these risks and impacts. And we do this through a few different mechanisms. We provide interactive, open source, web-based tools like Aqueduct, which I'll talk about in a second, and through our Aqueduct Alliance and one-on-one advisory services. So first, I'll introduce you to our Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. WRI has been a leader in helping companies use Aqueduct to understand how global water risks and opportunities are emerging worldwide and affecting their businesses. The tool uses a peer-reviewed methodology and the best available globally comparable data to measure and to map water risks like water stress, water quality, risk of floods, risk of droughts, reputational risks, and other water risk indicators. And it's used by many of the world's biggest multinational companies, global investors, journalists, governments, researchers, and others. So on this slide here, I've circled a couple of features of Aqueduct that might be of particular interest. The top left provides options for different weighting schemes. So we have a number of water risk indicators. These weighting schemes combine them in such a way that makes them especially relevant for different sectors. So you can see here there's a food and beverage sector. So you can get kind of a composite water risk indicator for the food and beverage sector, and the map will display the water risk accordingly globally. Then down at the bottom, you can also enter specific locations. So you could import locations of your operations, of your suppliers, and get a portfolio-wide assessment of how water risks are impacting your supply chain and your operations. And then at the top right, there's a download button. There's also the option to work with these data offline. If you want to just download all the data, do some analyses offline on your own, or incorporate these data into your internal systems. We're currently working on updating the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas. We have Aqueduct, what we're calling 3.0, coming down the pike in the next year or so. And this will have a number of new updates. We'll have some additional water risk indicators and improved water risk indicators, for example, on groundwater and water quality. And we're also going to be releasing a brand new Aqueduct tool called Aqueduct Food. Aqueduct Food is being designed to add an agricultural lens to the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas. So we're pairing our water risk indicators that I mentioned before, like on water stress, seasonal variability, drought severity, with data from the International Food Policy Research Institute on where crops are grown, yields, production, trade, demand, and some other data sets. And our objective here with this tool is to help users better understand these water and agriculture dynamics, with the goal of helping companies and other decision makers really be more proactive in identifying these risks coming down the line, and also identifying opportunities for getting greater agricultural production, greater food security. So I have an example here on this next slide about how someone from the food and beverage sector might be able to use this tool. So let's say you're working for a company responsible for supply chain management. You could use Aqueduct Food to assess risks to your supplier's water resources. The tool could be useful to help identify, for example, if that drought in Brazil is just kind of a blip, or if it's more of a long-term trend, and you really need to be thinking hard about your management of agriculture and water in that area. You could also use the tool to help you make decisions on where to invest in infrastructure. Again, looking at that long-term picture to see where some areas are that are going to be more sustainable. Or if you're sourcing new ingredients, you can evaluate some potential areas to do so. So users can view the entire globe, or like I'm showing here, you can select a country of interest. And we have a number of crops. You can look at all cropland, or you can choose a specific crop. So here on this first map on the left, I've selected rice, and we're looking at India. So the map is currently showing rice producing areas in India, and that's shaded by the level of rice production, and that's at a 10 by 10 kilometer pixel scale. And then the map on the right, we're overlaying water stress, which is looking at the risk of water withdrawals versus renewable supplies. And the areas in red there are going to indicate there's less water availability or more competition for water among users. So we provide these sorts of maps. Data is also available for download, similar to the Risk Atlas, or at least will be available for download when the tool's ready. And we also have customized figures and statistics that we generate based on the user's interests, and those are designed to help you tease out key messages, key trends from these data. So we currently have a beta version of this Aqueduct Food tool. We're hoping to have a soft launch in the next few months. So if you are interested in learning more, please do let us know. And finally, the last thing I'll mention about our water programs work is the work that we do with companies outside of our Aqueduct tools. So through our Aqueduct Alliance, we convene companies and others to share insights and guidance and collaborate on tool development and knowledge sharing. And we also do some work one-on-one with companies on customized risk and impact assessments. If there are analyses you want to do that the tools that go beyond the capabilities of the tools. And we also help develop innovative stewardship strategies. So for example, we recently worked with a company to assess their agricultural supply chain's impact on water quality. And we're working with companies on more of a public-facing exercise, developing a common framework for identifying investments required to meet Sustainable Development Goal 6 related to water. So that's a brief overview of our water program's work. And hopefully this gives you a better understanding of how we can help you identify and mitigate your risks and your water risks and impacts, and happy to answer any questions at the end.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Aqueduct's one of my favorite things we do here. I think it's just such an interesting and powerful tool. But second only to maybe my other favorite tool here, Global Forest Watch. So I'm going to turn over to my friend Luis. Luis joined WRI just over a year ago, and is an expert in using geospatial technology to monitor commodity supply chains, and leads the team here at WRI working with some of the world's largest companies on monitoring forests and commodities within the sustainability agenda. So Luis, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, JP. Well, it's a pleasure to join this webinar today, and thanks for everyone participating. In 2016 alone, the world lost an area of forest which was equivalent to the area of New Zealand. And we know that 70% of tropical deforestation somehow related to food and agricultural production, which really puts the link to food and agricultural supply chains. Because of those challenges, there are more than 400 companies across the globe that have made commitments to get rid of deforestation on their supply chains. The challenge is that we have less than 100 days to get there, and so how do we do it? We said that one cannot manage what one does not measure, and as WRI motto is count it, change, and scale it, I'm here today to try to present a little bit how we can help with that. So technology has really transformed our personal lives. It's changing businesses. There's no reason why it cannot be used to promote more sustainable operations as well. Global Forest Watch is a WRI-led initiative that uses the power of satellites, cloud computing, and big data. So anyone with internet connection can see where forests were lost anywhere in the globe in near real time. Here in this example, you can see illegal roads that are being opened in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest, as they happen. You can see that information as soon as last week. So if somebody's changing that last week, you can see that in areas as small as a baseball diamond, or where I come from, as we prefer soccer analysis, as small as a penalty box. And the key thing here is it's not about buying expensive satellite imageries. It's about training the computer to identify that and automatically calculate gigantic amounts of information, just deliver the insights. Hence the global coverage and the very, very low costs. Before this, in this Peruvian example, before the park rangers had to fly by to identify where the guys were and keep on flying and find the problems, now they sit at their office hitting refresh on their computer until something pops up, and then just send the rangers. And here you can see they caught the guys there on that illegal road as it was happening. Next, please. So my team's work is how we can use the power of that technology to support the private sector, to manage their risks and make smarter decisions about their procurement strategies, and ultimately improve their business sustainability. We've partnered with a few industry actors and leading actors over the past few years to test the application of these data sets to their operations, and we have run numbers for several of them. Many of them have used the numbers and the reports that have made to guide their procurement strategies, to publish reports, to communicate to investors and buyers. There's even some cases in which they have used that to alarm their own suppliers that something was happening. We have one example in which one bank let their farmer client know there was a fire happening in their forest, saving their cattle herd and their land, which the farmer was not aware of. Now we really want to bring that opportunity not only for this handful of companies that we're working with, but for any company anywhere. And that's why we're launching GFW Pro, an application to securely manage your deforestation risk in your supply chain. So how does it work? Well, first, it allows you to upload a full portfolio of supply areas. What are the areas of interest, from large supply areas to supply sheds around a given facility, going all the way down to a mill or a farm, if you so want. Second, it allows you to view the results of that whole portfolio in dashboard-like types of approaches. We love maps, but you know the decisions are made based on graphs and rankings, so that's what the system delivers. Third, we invest a lot on security and architecture so you can manage your own information in a protected environment for your eyes only. And fourth, we made best efforts to align with internal workflows so you can create your own internal workflow. For example, procurement teams identify the areas and input information to the system. Sustainability teams evaluate the risks and make recommendations. Boards decide and monitor the evolution over time. Next, please. And here's one sneak peek example on how that could be used. So let's assume that you just identify the areas in your portfolio which you're sourcing soy from, and you can see over time what are the general trends of that portfolio, not in one specific region, but for your whole portfolio. Is it improving or not? Is it getting better? Which are the areas that you need to be paying most attention if you are to invest your bucks to implement, for example, a CSR program or a new procurement strategy? Next, please. Once you do that and have an overview of the changes of your portfolio, then you can zoom in specific locations. Once you prioritize, for example, one region, let's see what is happening on that specific region. And here's an example. Let's assume that you monitored your palm oil supply and identified one or two mills which were the ones that are more critical for meeting your challenges. And then you can zoom in on that specific mill, for example, to assess its deforestation risks when it compares to their peers, to see exactly where in a map that deforestation is occurring, and also track the evolution of that specific mill over time. So we are about to launch that application on spring. And if you're interested, contact us and visit pro.globalforestwatch.org to learn more and get started.
Great, thanks, Luis. And I want to turn things over now to my colleague, Stephen. Stephen has been with WRI for 10 years and is a senior expert on both science-based targets and the greenhouse gas protocol.
Thank you, JP. Yes, I'll be talking about the tools offered by the Science-Based Targets Initiative to help companies set ambitious targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. For some context, global greenhouse gas emissions have increased significantly since the Industrial Revolution, and under business as usual scenarios, they will continue to climb, pushing global temperatures by the end of the century to about 4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. In contrast, science says that temperature rise must be limited to about 2 degrees centigrade at most. Otherwise, we'll experience changes in precipitation and temperature that will significantly disrupt agricultural commodity supply chains. And the problem here is that existing government pledges to reduce emissions, when taken together, aren't enough to get us to this 2-degree threshold. So there's a big gap between the reductions the world has committed to and the reductions that science tells us are necessary for stable agricultural systems and food supply. Of course, this is a problem for food and beverage companies, but it's also an opportunity for companies to demonstrate leadership and act ambitiously to reduce emissions and contribute to closing this gap. And this is where the concept of science-based targets come in. Science-based targets go beyond incremental reductions and specify by how much and by how quickly companies must reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to ensure that they do their part to contribute to a 2-degree future. And to take an example, General Mills has set a science-based target to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 28% between 2010 and 2025. And this target covers General Mills' entire value chain, including its internal operations, but also commodity production, which is typically the biggest emissions category by far for food and beverage companies. Hundreds of companies are in the process of setting a science-based target, and over 350 have committed to set a science-based target through the SBT initiative. And this number is steadily increasing over time. With the food and beverage and retail sectors, 45 have joined the SBT initiative to set a science-based target. And companies that have set a target include Walmart, Kellogg's, McDonald's, Unilever, Tesco, Danone. And in fact, McDonald's announced its target today. The SBT initiative is a collaboration amongst 4 NGOs, WRI, CDP, WWF, and the UN Global Compact, to support companies in their efforts to set SBTs. And the initiative works with companies in a 4-step process. And companies can first sign on to set a target, at which point they're listed on the initiative's website as committed companies. Companies then have 2 years to set a target, and they can do that using a range of technical resources that have been made available by the initiative. These resources include calculation tools, guidance documents, and criteria and best practices for understanding what an SBT looks like, as well as blogs and case studies from other food and beverage companies. At any point, a company can submit a draft target to the initiative for review, and our technical staff will work with the company to, as necessary, suggest changes and ensure that the target is aligned with science. Once a company has secured internal approval of a target, and once that target has been validated by the initiative, the next step is to communicate and announce that SBT. The initiative will announce the target on its website and can also work with companies to jointly promote the target through press releases, case studies, speaking opportunities, and other opportunities. A final point is that the initiative is very active in developing new technical resources for companies. So we encourage you to subscribe to the initiative's newsletter just to stay abreast of the latest offerings and news. And a link to that newsletter can be found on the Science Based Targets website, sciencebasedtargets.org. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And wrapping up today's program, before we get into the Q&As, I would like to introduce Emily Nagel. Emily manages WRI's corporate consultative group, our inner circle of corporate partners. So, Emily?
Yeah, thanks, JP. So hello, everyone. I'm Emily Nagel. And as you just heard, WRI's experts are developing exciting tools, research data, guidance, and I hope that you agree that it's all valuable to a corporate audience and sustainable business leaders. So for companies that would like to continue the conversation, our corporate relations team can help. Specifically, I want to make sure that you on the webinar today are aware of the CCG. It's a great place to start for companies who want to work with WRI in an integrated and cross-cutting way, and do so with the support of a dedicated account manager. So you can see on the slide here examples of what our member benefits are. Some of the benefits are in the category that are consistent to all members, like our newsletter and events, while other benefits are tailored to the member company's specific goals and priorities. So for example, in that category, we could help with target setting, executive briefings, peer review, and more. So I'd love to continue this discussion with any company who's interested, but also don't take my word for it. Here on the slide, you can see our current roster of members from a wide range of sectors, known leaders, brands, and many who are really trying to raise their ambition. Some of the members in this group have even been with us since the beginning of the CCG for nearly 10 years. So happy to continue that conversation if you're looking to engage with WRI, not just in one area, but across the whole host of programs. Back to you, JP.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Emily. So again, if you have any questions for any of our friends that joined us on the call today, chatting about WRI's programs, feel free to enter them in now, but not seeing any. I'll hold out for about 15 seconds and then let folks get back to their busy Tuesdays. And again, thanks for joining us today. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out slides, relevant links, and upcoming events here at WRI via follow-up email later today or early tomorrow. And with that, I would like to thank our experts here at WRI. Oh, where? So one question coming in, are the tools free? Yes, everything we do here at WRI is free, open access, and available to the public. So feel free to stop by WRI.org. Or like I said, feel free to contact Emily, myself, or experts. We'll be sending our contact information after the call, and we can point you in the right direction. And how can one get access to Aqueduct? Sarah?
Aqueduct, the website is in the slides, and we'll send out, I think, a link as well. It's wri.org/aqueduct, and it's also free, open source. But feel free to reach out if you have specific questions about using the tool itself.
Excellent. One question coming in, Stephen, I'm teeing this up for you. Let's talk about Scope 3 emissions, challenges and opportunities for achieving the SDGs.
And yes, that's a great question. Scope 3 emissions are often challenging for companies when they set a science-based target, and the initiative has been working hard to develop further guidance and tools to help companies set those Scope 3 targets. I am more than happy to have a discussion with a company around setting a Scope 3 target. So please feel free to get in contact with me directly, and we can continue that conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephen. Rich, I have one for you. Where did this one go? Yeah, are there any additional case studies coming out in the future of how companies can implement the food loss and waste standard?
So right now, I mean, there's a handful that are up on the website. I think we worked with over 200 stakeholders, including many from the private sector, in developing the food loss and waste protocol. So there's a number of companies in the Consumer Good Forum and others who are implementing it. So as we get more, we're putting them up on the website, but there's already a handful up there.
Related question for you. Can the food loss and waste protocol be used to measure food waste generated on a country level?
Yes, so it's designed to be flexible for all kinds of entities, so not only those in the private sector, so it can be used for national level governments or like city governments. So again, it's designed to be flexible in that way. Yes.
Great. You're a popular guy, Rich. So next question up for you. What advice do you have for suppliers, startups to adapt to new sustainability strategies of large companies in the food and feed industry?
For suppliers to adapt to new sustainability strategies, that's the question?
Yep.
Ooh, that's a good question. Do you have any, Louise? Because I think this might go down to the farm level.
Yeah. So do we have any advice for suppliers to adapt to new sustainability strategies of large companies?
I mean, it's Luis here. I think my recommendation is seeing that this space is changing fast, and requirements and companies' programs are also. So as the old saying says, who's not on the table is on the menu. My recommendation is to really get involved, right? And try to track where the changes are and where the key requests are coming across and the key tools and standards that are being used for that. So you can make your decisions on picking which is the one that is most effective and linked to your businesses.
Mm-hmm. A related question for you and Sarah here. So how do you propose to companies that purchase for multiple years in advance manage water and forest threats as they happen?
Well, I would say, again, you cannot measure what you cannot measure. And obviously, the level of information that you get depends on the geographies, depends on the commodity supply chains, depends on your business structure. But you can always start to measure something. So even if you're buying in advance, you know which are the areas they're buying from, and you can track what is happening on those areas. So once that commodity is delivered to you, you can see that on that given, even if you bought that many years back, you can see that on that given year, what has happened on that geography, and you can evaluate the level of association with impacts on that area. And then to make a better or readapt your procurement strategies for the longer term based on that, on that data.
Sure, anything to add?
Yeah, and as far as Aqueduct goes, Aqueduct is designed to give you kind of a long-term perspective. It's not near real-time information like GFW is. So just to share some anecdotes from some of our users, what we've heard is they really see value in that. So they may hear, from their management that they're concerned about a drought that's happening in one of their areas from which they're supplying, from which they're sourcing. And if they can turn to a tool like Aqueduct that kind of takes a step back, looks at the big picture, looks at the long term, and say, look, this area is likely to be pretty stable and have sufficient water resources over the long term, then they can all kind of take a deep breath and move forward knowing that. Or on the other hand, if it is more of a long-term trend, they can take appropriate action at that point. So I think it is useful for those long-term decisions, giving that picture based on the historic trends.
Perfect. Thanks. Have another one coming in on food loss and waste, Rich. So can you provide any specific country examples of those that have used food loss and waste to measure?
Country examples or company examples?
Country.
So I'm actually going to have to, I don't work day to day on the food loss and waste protocol, so I would actually refer that to others on the team. So please just shoot us an email afterwards on that, and I'll make sure that yes. And also just to reemphasize that we have a training tomorrow on the food loss and waste protocol at 10 o'clock in the morning. So
we can deep dive into some of this.
Exactly.
Great. So really great question here. Do companies need to have a technical team to interpret and use the tools like GFW and Aqueduct? So Sarah, let's kick off with you. How do we typically support companies? Obviously, anyone can hop on at any time to Aqueduct, but how do we typically support them in their use of the tool?
We certainly try to design the tools to be user-friendly. You don't need to be familiar with GIS or be a modeler to use these tools. We should have some good resources online, and of course you're welcome to reach out if you do run into problems, but we hope we can design them for non-technical users, although I think most of our usership is generally kind of researchers. But yeah, feel free to let us know if you run into any issues.
Luis?
Yeah, to add, I think so. There's a suite of tools that serves different objectives, and we try to design them as easy to use as possible. So I can say for GFW Pro, we most definitely do not have to be a GIS specialist. Obviously, just to harmonize expectations, whenever you're starting with Salesforce or SAP or any other internal management system within your company, you need to just pay a little bit of attention to it. And we are going to start training and promoting training sessions and training materials as soon as the tool is launched. So again, please log to pro.globalforestwatch.org so you can keep informed once we have those training sessions.
Great. And we'll include that link in the follow-up materials as well, so you can join the listserv and keep up to date on upcoming trainings. All right, and I'm going to give it another 10 seconds for additional questions. We've had a great thread. You've kept my friends here on their toes. So one question coming through, are there any tools to help companies benchmark their progress?
For a specific...
I would imagine, like, let's just say against the deforestation commitments. I mean, that's where PRO is kind of moving from, right? Or moving toward.
Yeah, I think exactly what we're trying to tackle with PRO is that at first companies can benchmark their progress against themselves. But one of the features is that we hope that then it will be allowed them to report on their progress and promoting then industry-wide benchmarking. But it will be for the companies to do that. Mm-hmm. But at least you need to start benchmarking you this year against how you were doing last year at the very first step.
Right, right.
One thing that we're doing, the Better Buying Lab, is trying to design a simple calculation tool for companies to measure the greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and land use associated with the food that they're purchasing, and do that over time, and eventually benchmark that to science-based targets for diet shifts. So that's something that to look at to look for over the coming months, but it's under development right now.
Excellent. And I think another interesting play here at WRI is a number of years ago, after we've been working on science-based targets for several years, our friends at Mars came to us and said, hey, I love the idea of science-based targets for greenhouse gases because it allows me to have a fundamentally different conversation with my C-suite. I'm no longer debating the level of ambition that we as a company should have. The science says this is the level that we should be reaching, and now I'm having a more impactful conversation about how do we hit that target. I would love to have that conversation with my C-suite on water and land impacts and other issue areas. So WRI, can you help us set that type of methodology? And so that embarked a number of year-long projects, resulting in a project from doing better to enough, and resulting in a multi-stakeholder process now that WRI is helping lead on context-based water targets. The idea being that obviously a little bit more complicated than greenhouse gases in many respects, but helping companies kind of identify what is their fair share for setting water targets at a watershed level, not just from kind of the social or wash aspect, but also actually mitigating the risk and solving the problem of water risk at local areas. So just to fill in some of the questions I'm seeing in here. So last question here, would WRI be advocates of making public targets that aren't realistically attainable? E.g., multiple companies are progressing toward their deforestation targets, but likely will not be hit.
Well, I think we're not an advocacy organization. We are trying to make big ideas happen, and we're trying to support both everyone to achieve those targets. So we're trying to facilitate as much as we can the correct definitions of those targets.
Stephen, anything from you on realistic targets in the greenhouse gas space?
Yes, and companies differ in their approach. Many companies will only set an SBT if they have a clear line of sight to the reductions. That is, they will only set an SBT if they know that the reductions are feasible. Of course, other companies have a different culture and will set an ambitious target and then work to figure out how they can meet that target. But certainly setting SBTs is a feasible option for many companies.
Excellent. And every time I say I'm going to give 10 more seconds, somebody comes up with a question. So I'll say I'll give 10 more seconds, folks, to send questions our way. And with that, I want to thank our experts here, and Stephen down in your neck of the woods, and those of you that joined us from literally across the globe today. Thanks for joining us. Be on the lookout for more information from us in your inboxes coming in the hours ahead. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can answer any more questions or help you on your sustainability journey. So thanks everybody for joining us today.